On a cold morning earlier this year, a Russian armored column began moving toward a Ukrainian defensive line. The ground shook as artillery fire tried to pin Ukrainian troops inside their trenches. At first glance, it looked like a familiar maneuver built on decades of Russian doctrine. Tanks advancing in front, infantry fighting vehicles close behind, and heavy fire meant to force defenders to stay low. But the battlefield they were driving into had quietly changed. Long before the first tank reached the village edge, Ukrainian operators hidden far from the front were already powering up their drones. Artillery could silence soldiers, but it could not reach pilots who never exposed themselves. And within minutes, the assault began to fall apart under a threat no doctrine had prepared for. What unfolded next showed how a modern assault can collapse before infantry ever fires a shot. The moment the Russian tanks rolled out, they entered a trap they did not see coming. While the armored vehicles thundered forward, Ukraine's FPV drone teams had already marked their arrival and prepared the long game. At a safe distance behind the front lines, reconnaissance drones locked onto the column, transmitting live coordinates and movement cues to operators hidden underground or behind forests. According to analysts, FPV drones have become ideal for trench and urban fights in Ukraine because they are cheap, plentiful, and able to strike where big systems cannot. Early in the attack, the Ukrainians launched dozens of FPV craft. Many units missed or detonated near their targets, but that did not matter. Ukraine's doctrine now treats quantity as a method in itself. One report estimates that 7 drone sorties on average may be required to destroy a target. Yet the real logic is saturation. Send enough machines so some hit. As the tanks ground to a halt, struggling against immobilized terrain or stalled engines, the infantry fighting vehicles behind lost formation and rhythm. Russia's classic model column advance, suppressive fire, followed by dismounted infantry, simply faltered. The fear factor came swiftly. Footage shows soldiers abandoning vehicles and running toward tree lines or ruined houses, not because they were hit directly, but because they harbored no hope of safe refuge. One drone-fed video shows a Russian soldier frantically trying to shoot down an incoming FPV drone, a moment that sums up the mismatch between old armor doctrine and new aerial technology. When your enemy flies above and around you, trenches and foxholes matter less. What the Ukrainians proved in this phase was the final stage of combined arms had shifted. Once armor is pinned or immobilized, the job falls to FPVs to finish the scene. Instead of waiting for infantry to fight through, drones create a state of constant threat. The column that should have broken through found itself surrounded by machine eyes and machine missiles. When the tanks stopped moving, the assault ceased to be about firepower and became about exposure. From that point on, the battle no longer belonged to the armored men inside the steel hulls, but to the operators miles away, controlling cheap, agile drones. The moment that the Russian armored column ground to a halt, its human protectors discovered that the sky had become their greatest threat. As the tanks stopped moving, swarms of Ukrainian FPV drones took off in coordinated waves, securing a new form of control over the battlefield. These drones, though each individually piloted, operated together in groups that created what analysts call a swarm effect, overwhelming traditional defenses and forcing the enemy into panic. According to a detailed study, FPV drones were increasingly deployed in large numbers from 2023 onward and proved remarkably effective against heavy vehicles and troop concentrations. As these swarms advanced, unmanned reconnaissance drones provided constant overwatch, tracking Russian formations and feeding live data to the FPV operators. These recon platforms allowed Ukrainian controllers to redirect attacks in real time, choosing targets on the move rather than stationary ones. One major review noted that the battlefield by mid-2023 had become highly transparent to a depth of 10 to 20 kilometers, 6 to 12 miles, thanks to UAV surveillance networks. With this real-time link, FPV teams could switch from one target to another as Russian vehicles stalled or infantry dismounted. In response, many Russian soldiers began to abandon their vehicles prematurely or scatter toward open fields and tree lines, hoping to evade the drones. Cameras mounted on the Ukrainian craft captured scenes of personnel jumping from vehicles, running for cover, or diving into wooded terrain as they lost formation. Through this behavior, the new role of drones became clear. Beyond destroying hardware, they began to hunt individual soldiers. Indeed, footage exists of lone Russian troops attempting to shoot down FPVs with rifles, a desperate act that underscores how outdated traditional reactions have become in this new environment. Once the column lost cohesion and the armor stopped its advance, FPVs picked up the finishing work. Instead of infantry clearing the field, drone pilots detected movement, identified exposed troops, and struck with small, explosive-equipped drones that removed the need for costly human assaults. Analysts argue that this capability has forced Russia into a grinding war of attrition instead of swift mechanized breakthroughs. For the Russian forces, the shock wasn't just the damage to tanks or IFVs. It was the realization that open ground, movement, and even placeholders of cover had become perilous. By the time dusk approached, the battlefield had changed its character. What looked like a standard armored assault became a four-dimensional kill zone where sight, movement, and risk were dictated by machines controlled hundreds of kilometers away. This new form of war favors those who can deploy large numbers of low-cost drones, operate via decentralized networks, and adapt quickly, rather than those who rely purely on armor and massed infantry. The transition from hardware to networked swarms marks a key turning point in the modern battlefield, and it was unfolding in real time on the Ukrainian front. As infantry dispersed, they sought cover in buildings and shelters, but even those places no longer offered safety. When the tanks stopped and the jungle of battle shifted, the next wave of danger came not across open fields, but into the very shelters that troops believed would protect them. A group of Russian soldiers sought refuge in a small underground cellar. One of them managed to shoot down a drone overhead, yet that moment of asserted victory proved to be a fatal error. The muzzle flash and the sound of gunfire revealed their exact location, and seconds later, a Ukrainian FPV drone swooped into the entrance, detonating inside the confined space. What seemed safe became a chamber of destruction. In another scene the same day, military video shows Russian infantry hiding inside a damaged house. The structure was half collapsed and seemed like the last stronghold for troopers escaping the open terrain. However, Ukrainian FPVs repeatedly struck the roof, then the walls, targeting vulnerable beams and corners. The firing pattern resembled a continuous bombardment until the house collapsed in fire and rubble. Analysts note that these drones now perform tasks once reserved for specialized assault squads, who cleared buildings room by room. The tactical effect of these incidents is profound. Where trenches, foxholes, or small bunkers used to provide cover, the new reality is that any interior space can become a kill zone. In confined structures, the blast effect of a small explosive is magnified by the walls and ceiling, turning what should be refuge into a trap. Ukrainian commanders realize this and deliberately channel Russian troops into structures, knowing FPV teams will hunt them there. The so-called battlefield geometry has changed. Vertical access, inside corners, and hidden chambers offer no safe sanctuary when drones can fly, dodge, and explode through roof or wall. What this means is simple but unsettling for infantry tactics. Soldiers trained to dig in or take shelter now face an enemy that treats buildings as targets rather than hiding places. Instead of infantry storming a building, drones clear it from the inside out. The Russian forces that day found themselves under threat not just from outside, but from within their own fortress. Video analysis confirms that the Ukrainian drone effort is shifting toward interior penetration rather than exterior suppression. By late afternoon, the Russian troops, once confident in their heavy vehicles and fortified positions, were left to pick through ruins and count losses. A structure that might have offered hours of protection instead collapsed in minutes under drone attack. In that way, the war inside these buildings foreshadows a broader change. In modern conflict, cover itself can become the enemy's weapon. While FPVs hunted soldiers in close quarters, another threat emerged overhead, one that Russian troops have come to fear even more. When darkness settled over the front lines, Ukraine launched a weapon that made Russian troops look upward with dread. They called it Baba Yaga, a heavy hexacopter bomber designed to drop mortar shells and heavier payloads on targets once thought safe. According to the Ukrainian firm Skyfall, the model nicknamed Vampire carries a striking capability: thermal imaging, precision drop of grenades or bombs, and even the ability to haul supplies under fire. From early in the evening, drone teams would glide into position 3 to 7 kilometers short of Russian lines, then ascend and release ordnance into trenches, logistics hubs, or hardened positions. Reports indicate the heavy drones have payloads of 15 to 30 kilograms or more and reach ranges up to 60 kilometers in some variants. Russian units admit that this system forced them to rethink night operations and defensive posture because the bomber drone made no distinction between visible frontline and what had been a rear safe zone. Footage captures rounds falling from above, striking with a quiet whump, and detonating among sleeping soldiers or hidden vehicles. One analysis lists that the Baba Yaga operates like a small aircraft, not just a hobby drone, with crews trained in aviation-style operations. The psychological effect proved as potent as the physical damage. Russian soldiers, unused to being attacked in their own safe zones, developed a dread of the rotor sound in the night, a dread that disrupted rest, reduced morale, and forced units into shelter, altering their routines and reducing combat effectiveness. The combination of Baba Yaga bombers with the smaller FPV drones created a layered drone threat for Russian forces. While FPVs pursued vehicles and individual soldiers, the heavy bomber drone attacked fixed points, supply dumps, and the rear echelon. This multi-tiered assault denied Russian troops both mobility and sanctuary. Moving across open ground risked FPV attack, and staying inside buildings or vehicles exposed them to the heavy bomber. According to an unmanned systems comparison, Ukraine's heavy bomber drones created what one specialist described as a nighttime kill zone that the Russians do not control. For troops on the ground, the presence of Baba Yaga changed the character of the battle. It meant that artillery fire and bunkers could no longer guarantee safety. It forced Russian commanders to shift resources into counter-drone efforts, diverting attention and manpower away from offensive operations. One source claimed that Russian forces established dedicated units just to intercept these bomber drones. The result, the heavy bomber drone became not just a weapon against tanks or bunkers, but a psychological weapon, undermining cohesion, inducing fear, and creating hesitation, 3 dangerous traits on a battlefield. By dawn the next morning, Russian formations that had counted on safe rear areas and rest periods found themselves shaken, supply columns delayed, and morale frayed. The drone war was no longer confined to direct strikes. It had become a campaign to erode the enemy's will to fight. But the most revealing part of the footage wasn't the destruction of shelters or armored vehicles. It was the battle for logistics unfolding behind them. Behind the roar of artillery and the clash of armor, the war in Ukraine is often decided not by tanks, but by the unsung runners of supply. Modern frontline units now rely heavily on small-scale logistics systems, quad bikes, pickup trucks, and individual delivery runners carrying ammunition, water, or fuel. According to a Sky News report from May 2022, nighttime ambushes on quad bikes and drone attacks on resupply convoys helped Ukrainian forces stall the Russian advance toward Kyiv. In this particular operation, Ukrainian drone teams shifted their focus from targeting only heavy vehicles to hunting these micro-supply routes. At dusk, footage shows a quad bike loaded with supplies racing across open ground, then exploding into flames after a drone strike. Minutes later, a pickup truck packed with ammunition erupted in a massive blast, showing that one hit on a logistics vehicle can carry the same operational damage as several hits on fighting vehicles. Analysts argue that destroying these supply links forces assault groups to halt, rest, or retreat for lack of bullets and fuel. One of the most telling scenes shows a lone Russian soldier, visibly exhausted, running across a field while carrying a bottle likely fuel or water and a bag that might contain batteries or food. He throws his helmet and cap in desperation as a drone circles overhead. The moment captures the vulnerability of the so-called delivery man. Once thought safe behind the front lines, now exposed to unmanned hunters. Cutting off water, shells, and fuel can neutralize an entire assault before it ever reaches a trench. The strategic implication is clear. Logistics is no longer a secondary issue, it is a frontline fight. Russia's heavy mechanized units may have armor, guns, and artillery, but if their supply links collapse, their advance grinds to a halt. Ukraine's emphasis on targeting the smallest supply lines turned a classic armored assault into a waiting game. By forcing the enemy to pause, reload, or reroute, Ukraine seized the initiative without traditional set-piece engagements. Moreover, what makes this shift even more important for US observers is how it changes the calculus of war. Rather than focusing on big-ticket systems like tanks or missiles, we must now consider quad bikes, small trucks, and even single runners as valid targets in high-tech war. For American analysts and policymakers, it serves as a reminder that even a conventional force with superior firepower becomes vulnerable if its logistic path is threatened by cheap drones and agile hit-and-run tactics. By the time dusk turned to night, Russian units once confident in their armor and firepower found themselves waiting for fuel, waiting for ammo, waiting for the next quad bike to roll. In that silence, they realized the battle was no longer just in front lines. It was in every narrow road, every shadowy field, and every runner carrying the next load. The fight over supply lines was not limited to humans. Machines began delivering supplies too, but even they were not safe. The next shift in this war arrived not from the skies, but from the ground. Unmanned ground vehicles began stepping into the danger zone. In one instance, a Russian ground drone, small and rolling along a road near the front line, broke down and then was destroyed by a Ukrainian FPV drone strike. The explosion revealed that it had been carrying ammunition or explosives, showing how logistics drones themselves are now frontline targets. Soon afterwards, Ukrainian forces publicly showcased an armed UGV, a tracked vehicle equipped with a rotating weapon mount, light armor plating, and remote control systems. Its design required teamwork. A ground operator controlled the vehicle, while a separate UAV operator provided aerial overwatch and guidance. According to recent analysis, Ukraine has tested more than 50 different UGV prototypes, many focusing on frontline delivery and clearance tasks rather than purely combat. These machines now serve multiple roles: reconnaissance ahead of manned units, delivery of supplies or ammunition into high-risk zones, and in some cases direct fire support where humans would face extreme danger. As one Ukrainian defense article noted, unmanned ground vehicles make a difference performing dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks that previously exposed soldiers to the greatest risk. For the Russian forces, the presence of UGVs adds another layer of complexity. Their traditional threats line artillery, armor, infantry waves now share the field with robotic platforms that can creep forward under cover, monitor their movements, and either deliver or destroy loads. In one sector, a UGV breakdown followed by explosion forced a Russian unit to halt its advance for several hours, as supply vehicles were rerouted and commanders waited for clearance. The robot's failure became a tactical win for Ukraine because it diverted enemy attention and resources. Importantly, the rise of UGVs highlights a broader transformation. War is moving toward machines taking the physical risk. Soldiers still command and control, but robots increasingly absorb the danger. Whether for evacuating wounded, scouting minefields, or carrying ammunition across exposed terrain, UGVs are starting to appear routinely. Reports from summer 2025 show that Ukrainian forces expanded UGV usage significantly to make up for the risks human runners faced under drone fire. For US observers, the implication is profound. Future ground wars may rely less on the number of boots on the ground and more on how effectively robotic assets are integrated into frontline operations. In this environment, a side with fewer manned soldiers but more autonomous or remote-controlled systems could gain a decisive edge. In this battle, tanks, IFVs, and infantry remain relevant. But UGVs are no longer fringe, they are integral. Yet despite these machines, a final scene from the footage captured the deeper meaning of the day's battle. In one dramatic moment of this confrontation, a Russian main battle tank becomes the emblem of a deeper collapse. After an FPV drone strike hits the turret directly, flames erupt from the hatches while the crew remains inside. The vehicle stalls, smoke pouring from its hull, yet no one climbs out. Whether trapped by protocol, immobilized systems, or paralyzed by fear, the crew's decision to stay inside speaks volumes. Analysts assert that armor alone no longer guarantees survivability when unmanned aerial systems dominate the airspace. At the heart of the issue lies doctrine. The Russian military continues to send tanks into areas where aerial surveillance, drone swarms, and loitering munitions have total air superiority. That mismatch is no accident. Reports show that the proliferation of low-cost drones has forced heavy vehicles to withdraw several kilometers behind the front line, reducing the effectiveness of traditional mechanized breakthroughs. The burning tank thus stands as a stark message. Doctrine built on shock and mass fails when enemies equip themselves with persistent, cheap aerial threats. This incident highlights not only technical vulnerability, but also strategic cost. The loss of the tank carries direct material value, but far more significant is the signal it sends to the troops around it. If a tank cannot protect you, what can? Russian crews reportedly questioned whether staying inside such vehicles offered more protection or more danger. The effect on morale spread rapidly through units, causing caution where boldness once prevailed. In modern warfare, perception is as powerful as firepower. Moreover, the burning hull underscores the importance of electronics, sensors, and drone countermeasures. In earlier conflicts, a tank's armor, gun, and engine were paramount. In this war, the advantage lies with forces that integrate remote sensors, drone networks, jamming systems, and digital warfare. Without those layers, even the most advanced tank stops being a spearhead and becomes a sitting target. According to one specialist review, a $200 drone could destroy a multi-million-dollar tank simply by dropping a grenade into its turret hatch. Russia's persistence in deploying armor into such high-risk zones reflects a larger failure: a military machine operating on outdated assumptions. When the battlefield becomes vertical, networked, and persistent, massed armor becomes a liability rather than an asset. The burning tank, frozen mid-assault, signals that real breakthroughs will not come from rolling steel alone, but from mastering the intersection of air, surface, and robotic systems. As the sun set on the battlefield that day, the assault ended not in a successful breakthrough, but in a tableau. A tank aflame, motionless, a monument to a doctrine outpaced by technology. That scene marked the end of the offensive and the beginning of a new understanding: that in modern war, survival rests on adaptability, connectivity, and unmanned dominance, not just armor and firepower. The burning tank, frozen in place, marked the end of the assault and the beginning of a new understanding of modern war. The August 9th strike on Alabuga ended with a lesson Russia could not escape, because one unmanned aircraft slipped through every defensive layer and destroyed months of Shahed production in under a minute. This happened after Moscow claimed for years that its air defense network was among the strongest in the world. Yet a silent drone with no GPS, no radio signal, and no data link still defeated it. Reports from the CSIS missile database estimate the value of the destroyed drones at nearly $500 million. An analysis from RAND explains why electronic warfare systems cannot stop autonomous platforms that carry no receivers at all. For the United States and NATO, the message is clear. The next battles will be shaped by low-cost autonomous systems, and Russia's weakness against them is now visible to everyone. If you want more deep analysis on modern warfare, Remember to subscribe to Military Force so you never miss the next report.